Sometimes the smallest thing you lose is the thing someone else has spent a lifetime searching for. I used to believe expensive hotels had a different kind of air, cleaner somehow, scented with polished marble, fresh flowers, and money that never worried about tomorrow. By the end of that Friday night, I learned they carried something else too. Secrets. The Grand Astoria Hotel glittered over Midtown Manhattan like a palace suspended above the city. Crystal chandeliers poured warm light across the ballroom, while a string quartet drifted through conversations about investments, charity foundations, and vacation homes in places I'd only seen in magazines at the grocery store checkout. I adjusted the sleeves of my black waitress uniform for what had to be the 20th time and balanced a silver tray filled with champagne flutes as I slipped between elegantly dressed guests. 25 years old, working double shifts 6 days a week, and saving every dollar I could for community college classes, I had learned how to become invisible. Wealthy people rarely looked directly at the staff. They smiled through us, reached past us, thanked us without remembering our faces. Most nights, that suited me just fine. Champagne? I asked with the practiced smile I'd perfected after 3 years in hospitality. A woman wearing enough diamonds to buy my apartment accepted a glass without breaking eye contact with the senator beside her. Across the ballroom, a jazz pianist quietly joined the quartet, softening the atmosphere even further. Everything felt graceful, controlled, predictable, until the room changed. It happened the way thunderstorms arrive in the summer. No announcement, no warning, just a shift in the air that everyone somehow noticed at once. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. Even the musicians hesitated for half a heartbeat before continuing. I followed everyone's gaze toward the entrance. 6 men in tailored black suits entered first, spreading through the ballroom with calm precision. They weren't loud or intimidating. They simply occupied space with the confidence of people who never expected resistance. Then he walked in behind them. Adrian Moretti. I didn't know his name yet, only that every important person in the room suddenly seemed eager to shake his hand. He looked to be in his early 30s, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly fitted charcoal suit without a single wrinkle despite the rain outside. His dark hair was neatly combed back, revealing calm blue-gray eyes that seemed to absorb every detail around him. He wasn't smiling, but neither did he appear unfriendly. He carried himself with the effortless confidence of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. The hotel manager rushed toward him personally. Several business leaders followed. Even the mayor's chief of staff crossed the ballroom to greet him. Whoever Adrian Moretti was, everyone important already knew. I lowered my eyes and kept walking. Rich people had rich friends. That wasn't my world. Miss, table 14 needs sparkling water. Another server whispered as we passed. Got it. I turned toward the VIP section, carefully weaving through guests laughing beneath glittering chandeliers. My shoes pinched my feet after nearly 9 hours on duty, but I ignored the discomfort. Rent was due next week, and aching feet never paid bills. As I reached for a crystal bottle of sparkling water, someone stepped backward unexpectedly. My shoulder clipped the edge of another server's tray. I caught the glasses before they shattered, but the sudden movement snapped the thin silver chain beneath my collar. I felt it instantly. The familiar weight disappeared from my neck. My locket struck the marble floor with a delicate metallic click. Time seemed to hesitate. The tiny heart-shaped locket bounced once, twice. Then the clasp, weakened by years of wear, sprang open. Inside rested a faded photograph no larger than a postage stamp. 2 smiling children stared back from another lifetime. I immediately dropped to one knee, my heart pounding harder than it should have over something so small. I'm so sorry, I whispered automatically, reaching toward it. Another hand reached the locket first. Long fingers carefully lifted it from the polished floor with surprising gentleness. I looked up. Adrian Moretti stood directly in front of me. The ballroom noise faded until all I could hear was my own breathing. His eyes never met mine. They remained fixed on the tiny photograph resting inside the open locket. The color slowly drained from his face. His steady breathing stopped. His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the delicate silver chain as though afraid it might disappear. Around us, conversations quietly resumed, unaware that the entire world had just shifted for one man. Adrian swallowed once before speaking, his normally controlled voice barely above a whisper. Where? He stopped, staring harder at the tiny picture. His expression changed from confusion to disbelief. Then, with eyes that suddenly carried years of grief I couldn't begin to understand, he looked directly at the smiling boy inside the faded photograph and quietly said, "That's my brother's face." I stared at him, convinced I had misheard. The ballroom continued breathing around us as though nothing extraordinary had happened, but inside the small circle where we stood, the world had become impossibly still. Adrian Moretti held my locket with both care and disbelief, his thumb resting lightly against the worn silver edge. His eyes never left the tiny photograph inside. I pushed myself to my feet, my knees suddenly unsteady inside shoes that had been comfortable only minutes earlier. "Sir," I said carefully, forcing my voice to remain professional, "that belongs to me." He did not answer. He looked at the picture again, studying every faded detail as though hoping it would somehow change. Finally, his gaze lifted to meet mine. The calm confidence everyone admired when he entered the ballroom had disappeared. In its place was something far more unsettling. Hope, the kind that looked almost painful. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. I reached toward the necklace. It was my mother's. His hand moved back slightly before I could touch it, not aggressively, simply protectively, as though the locket had become the most fragile object in the room. "Your mother gave this to you?" he asked. "Yes. When I was little." His jaw tightened. "How little?" I frowned, confused by the intensity of such ordinary questions. "I do not remember exactly. Maybe 4 years old. Maybe younger." He inhaled slowly, the kind of careful breath people take before opening a door they are afraid to walk through. "What was her name?" I hesitated. Something deep inside warned me that none of this was normal. Managers did not question waitresses about family photographs. Wealthy strangers did not stare at old lockets like they had discovered buried treasure. "Emily," my supervisor called from across the ballroom. "Everything all right?" I turned instinctively toward her voice. "Yes, I think so." When I looked back, Adrian was still waiting, patient, silent, watching every expression cross my face. "Her name was Sarah Carter," I answered. "At least, that is what I knew her as." A flicker crossed his eyes, recognition mixed with uncertainty. "Knew," he repeated. "She passed away when I was 9. Saying those words never became easier, no matter how many years had passed. After that I grew up with my aunt in Albany until I was 18. Adrian lowered his eyes to the photograph once more. "This boy," he said softly, almost to himself. His name was Ethan. The name meant nothing to me. I looked at the faded image again. A smiling teenage boy stood beside a little girl wearing overalls and missing one front tooth. Time had bleached almost every color from the picture except the warmth in their smiles. "I have never known who he was," I admitted. "My mother never explained the photograph. She only told me never to lose it." His expression sharpened immediately. "Never lose it?" She said one day it would explain where I belonged. The words escaped before I had time to think about them. I had not repeated that sentence aloud in years. My mother had whispered it during one of her last evenings at home, while fastening the necklace around my neck with trembling fingers. As a child, I thought she meant I would always remember my family. Standing inside the Grand Astoria ballroom, I was no longer sure that was what she meant at all. Adrian closed the locket very gently. "Emily Carter," he said, speaking my full name as though committing it to memory. "Have you ever searched for the people in this picture?" I shook my head. "No. Life was busy. Bills, school, work. Some mysteries stay on shelves because surviving comes first." Something about that answer seemed to affect him more than I expected. His shoulders lowered slightly, and for the first time since this strange conversation began, I saw genuine sadness in his face. Before either of us could speak again, one of the men in black suits approached quietly from behind him. "Mr. Moretti," he said in a respectful tone, "your meeting with the Foundation Board begins in 5 minutes." Adrian did not look away from me. "Cancel it." The man blinked once, clearly surprised. "Sir, reschedule everything." "Yes, sir." The assistant disappeared without another question. I stood frozen. Important people did not cancel major meetings because a waitress dropped an old necklace. Nothing about this made sense anymore. Adrian finally extended the locket toward me. I accepted it carefully, my fingers brushing the cool silver chain before slipping it into my palm. "Keep it safe," he said. "Please." His voice carried none of the authority that had filled the room when he arrived. Instead, it held quiet urgency. Because if I am right. He stopped himself before finishing the sentence. His eyes lingered on me for one long second, as though searching my face for someone else hidden beneath it. Then he turned toward the ballroom entrance, where his security team had already begun moving into position. Halfway there, he paused without looking back. "Emily," he said, "I think someone erased a chapter of both our lives. And I intend to find out why." Sleep should have come easily after a 14-hour shift, but the moment I closed my apartment door, the ballroom followed me home. I placed the silver locket on my tiny kitchen table beside a mug of tea that slowly grew cold, unable to stop staring at the faded photograph. The little girl smiled with complete trust, one hand wrapped around the older boy's arm, as though nothing in the world could separate them. I had spent years assuming he was a cousin, maybe an old family friend, someone my mother had forgotten to explain before she died. Now a complete stranger had looked at the same picture and spoken with absolute certainty. "That is my brother's face." I opened my laptop and searched the name Adrian Moretti. Hundreds of articles appeared. Business magazines called him a brilliant investor. Charity organizations praised his donations to children's hospitals and education programs. Real estate publications described him as one of the youngest developers to reshape parts of Manhattan. Not one article mentioned anything beyond polished photographs and carefully written biographies. Everything about him seemed almost too perfect, as though someone had edited every page before the public ever saw it. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, exhaustion finally pulled me into restless sleep. My dreams arrived in scattered pieces. Warm sunlight. A large white house with blue shutters. Someone laughing somewhere beyond a garden. A teenage boy kneeling to tie the shoelaces of a little girl wearing yellow overalls. Before I could see his face clearly, the dream dissolved into bright light, and I woke with tears already drying on my cheeks. I could not explain why. The next morning, life demanded normality. Coffee, subway, uniform, smile, customers. By noon, I had almost convinced myself the previous evening had been some strange coincidence until my manager stepped into the dining area, holding a small white envelope. "Emily," she called. "Someone dropped this off for you." There was no stamp, no return address, only my name written in elegant handwriting. Inside rested a single business card embossed with silver lettering. Adrian Moretti. Beneath his name was one sentence written by hand. "I would appreciate 1 hour of your time. Nothing more." My heartbeat quickened. There was no threat, no demand, just a polite request that somehow made me even more nervous. I slipped the card into my apron and returned to work, determined to ignore it. By evening, I had failed completely. Curiosity is a quiet thing. It does not shout. It simply refuses to leave. While I debated whether to call the number, Adrian sat inside the top-floor office of Moretti Holdings overlooking the Manhattan skyline. A thick folder rested open across his desk. Every page carried my name, employment records, school transcripts, tax documents, apartment leases, utility bills. Everything fit together almost perfectly. Almost. "Anything?" Adrian asked without looking up. His longtime advisor, Michael Donovan, stood near the window holding a second folder. "Nothing before age 9. Adrian looked up sharply. "Nothing." Michael shook his head. "The records begin with enrollment at an elementary school in Albany. Before that, there is no pediatric medical history, no birth certificate filed under Emily Carter, no preschool records, no family tax filings connected to Sarah Carter. It is as though both of them appeared from nowhere." Adrian leaned back slowly. "People do not appear from nowhere." "No," Michael agreed. "Someone usually makes them disappear first." Silence settled across the office. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and removed something he had carried for more than 20 years. An old family photograph protected inside a worn leather wallet. He placed it beside the enlarged image of my locket that security cameras had quietly captured the previous evening. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same smiling boy, the same shirt, the same summer afternoon. Only one difference remained. In the family photograph, the little girl's face had been scratched away long ago, leaving only a pale outline where someone had deliberately erased her. Adrian stared at both photographs side by side. "Who would remove one child from every official record?" he asked quietly. Michael answered with painful honesty. "Someone who never wanted her found." At that exact moment, my phone vibrated inside my apron. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello." A familiar calm voice replied. Emily, this is Adrian Moretti. I know this request may sound unusual, but I have found something that belongs to your past. And I believe your past has been waiting much longer than either of us realized. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned pale. The sounds of the restaurant faded behind me as I stepped into the quiet service hallway where the hum of refrigerators replaced the chatter of customers. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear traffic somewhere beyond the back door and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. How did you get my number? I finally asked. Adrian answered without hesitation. It was provided by your employer after I explained that I needed to return something connected to your family history. His voice remained calm, measured, almost gentle. There was no pressure in it, only certainty. I am not asking you to trust me, Emily. I am asking you to look at evidence. I closed my eyes. Every sensible instinct told me to hang up. Normal people did not meet powerful strangers because of old photographs. Normal people finished work, paid rent, and worried about grocery prices. Yet nothing had felt normal since my locket struck that marble floor. Where? I asked quietly. The New York Public Library. I blinked in surprise. The library? Public places make honest conversations easier. There was the faintest trace of warmth in his voice, almost a smile. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning. If you choose not to come, I will respect your decision. Before I could respond, the line went silent. The next morning the city felt unusually bright after an overnight rain. Sunlight reflected from office windows as I climbed the wide stone steps of the library, my heartbeat matching the rhythm of my footsteps. I almost turned around twice before reaching the entrance. Instead, I pushed through the heavy bronze doors and found Adrian waiting near the Rose main reading room. He stood beside a long oak table with no security surrounding him, dressed in a navy sport coat instead of the formal suit from the gala. Without the crowd constantly watching him, he looked less like an untouchable businessman and more like someone carrying the weight of unanswered questions. Thank you for coming, he said. I almost did not. I know. He gestured toward the table. Several old city maps, property records, and archival photographs had been carefully arranged in neat rows. At the center rested a black and white photograph of a brick orphanage surrounded by tall maple trees. Do you recognize this building? He asked. I studied the image. At first it meant nothing. Then a strange sensation spread through my chest. Not recognition exactly. Familiarity. Like hearing a melody I had forgotten I knew. No, I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. Adrian slid another photograph beside it. This one showed a colorful playground with a large oak tree standing near a white fence. The moment my eyes reached the swing hanging beneath its branches, a sharp memory flashed through my mind. Tiny hands gripping metal chains. Laughter carried by warm summer air. Someone pushing the swing higher while a teenage boy laughed behind me. My breath caught unexpectedly. I touched the edge of the photograph with trembling fingertips. I have dreamed about this place. Adrian watched me carefully, but did not interrupt. Not often, I continued. Just little pieces. A tree. Yellow flowers. Someone telling me not to jump because I would scrape my knees. I laughed nervously at how ridiculous it sounded, yet tears blurred my vision without permission. Dreams are strange. Adrian slowly reached into a leather folder and removed a faded visitor log protected inside a clear archival sleeve. This orphanage closed more than 20 years ago, he explained. Most of its records were lost when the building was abandoned. A volunteer historian recovered this log from storage 6 months ago. My eyes followed his finger down a handwritten list of names. Most were difficult to read. Some had faded almost completely. Then I saw it. Sarah. The handwriting matched no one I knew, but seeing my mother's name inside a document older than my memories made my pulse race. She volunteered here? I whispered. Adrian nodded. According to these records, yes. I looked farther down the page and suddenly froze again. Another name appeared beneath hers. Ethan Moretti. The same surname. The same boy from my locket. My chest tightened as though invisible threads had connected scattered pieces of my life all at once. He was here too. I breathed. Adrian lowered his eyes. Almost every weekend. Silence settled between us. Children laughed somewhere across the library courtyard outside, their voices drifting faintly through the tall windows. I stared at the page, unable to pull my eyes away from those two names sitting side by side. My mother. Ethan. The connection felt real now, no longer a coincidence. Then something else caught my attention near the bottom corner of the log. A third line had been partially erased. Most of the ink had disappeared beneath rough scratches, but one word remained barely visible. Emily. My name. Or at least the beginning of it. I looked up at Adrian, my heartbeat echoing inside my ears. He had already seen it, and from the expression on his face, I realized he had reached the same terrifying conclusion before I ever walked through those library doors. My eyes remained fixed on the faded visitor log while the rest of the library slowly disappeared around me. The quiet turning of pages, the distant footsteps across polished stone, even the soft ticking of the antique clock above the reading room all faded into the background. There, beneath my mother's name and Ethan Moretti's signature, the beginning of my own name had survived years of damage. Only 4 letters remained visible, but they were enough. Emily. I swallowed hard. This cannot be a coincidence, I whispered. Adrian rested both hands on the edge of the oak table. No, he replied. I stopped believing in coincidences the moment I saw your locket. I looked back at the page, searching for another explanation. Maybe another Emily. He nodded slowly. That was my first thought too. He reached into the folder again and carefully unfolded another document. This one was newer, a photocopy of an old personnel file recovered from county archives. Across the top appeared the name Sarah Carter. My heart skipped. Beneath it was a job description. Resident care assistant. The orphanage. My mother had worked there. She had not simply visited. She had been part of that place. I traced the faded typewritten letters with my fingertip. She never told me, I murmured. She barely talked about anything before we moved to Albany. Adrian remained silent, allowing me to absorb each discovery without interruption. It was something I had begun to notice about him. Despite his reputation for authority, he never rushed difficult moments. He simply waited until the truth reached me on its own. There is something else, he finally said. I debated whether to show you today. My stomach tightened. Show me. He slid one final photograph across the table. It showed a group of children standing in front of the orphanage during what looked like a spring picnic. Faces smiled beneath bright sunshine. Balloons floated above the lawn. I leaned closer. At first, everyone looked unfamiliar. Then I saw him. Ethan. Even in the grainy photograph, I recognized the same warm smile from the picture inside my locket. He looked a few years older than the children around him, standing protectively behind a little girl wearing a yellow sweater. The girl's face had been turned slightly away from the camera, making it impossible to identify her clearly. Still, something inside me stirred. My chest grew unexpectedly tight. I know that sweater, I whispered. Adrian looked at me carefully. What did you say? I know it. My voice trembled. I used to hate yellow because... I stopped. A memory surfaced so suddenly that it stole my breath. Tiny fingers clutching soft knitted sleeves. A teenage boy laughing as he placed a flower behind my ear. Someone calling me Little Sunshine because I refused to take off my favorite yellow sweater. The memory lasted only seconds before disappearing again, leaving behind only warmth and confusion. Tears filled my eyes before I realized I was crying. I remember his voice, I whispered. Not clearly, just enough to know it was kind. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, as though hearing those words answered a question he had carried for decades. Emily, he said softly, my brother volunteered at that orphanage every Saturday after school. He insisted on spending time with children who had no family nearby. He never missed a weekend unless he was sick. I stared at the photograph again. You think that little girl is me? I think there is a very real possibility. But why would my mother never tell me? Adrian looked toward the tall windows where autumn sunlight spilled across the reading room floor. Perhaps because she believed silence was the only way to keep you safe. Safe. The word echoed. Strangely inside my thoughts. Safe from what? Safe from whom? Before either of us could continue, Adrian's phone vibrated quietly. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time since we met, I saw genuine concern cross his face. He answered immediately, speaking only a few calm words before ending the call. What happened? I asked. He hesitated just long enough for me to know the answer mattered. Michael just received another archive from the county records office. And Adrian slowly turned his phone toward me. On the screen was a scanned intake form from the orphanage dated more than 20 years earlier. Several lines had been crossed out with thick black ink, but one sentence remained untouched. Child transferred under emergency authorization. Original identity sealed by court order. I felt the air leave my lungs. Adrian met my eyes with quiet certainty. Emily, he said. I do not think Emily Carter was ever the name you were born with. The words settled over me with a weight I could not explain. I do not think Emily Carter was ever the name you were born with. I stared at Adrian, waiting for him to smile. To admit this had all become one impossible misunderstanding, but his expression never changed. He looked at me with quiet compassion instead of certainty, as though he understood that a single sentence had just shaken the foundation of everything I believed about myself. I lowered my eyes to the scanned document on his phone once more. The black lines hiding most of the information somehow made the remaining words feel even louder. Original identity sealed by court order. People only do that in movies, I whispered. Adrian folded his hands together on the table. I used to think the same thing. I laughed softly, though nothing about the sound carried joy. My mother never lied to me. I am not saying she lied. His voice remained gentle. Sometimes protecting a child requires telling only the part of the truth they are old enough to carry. I wanted to disagree. Instead, I found myself remembering the evenings when my mother would stop talking the moment I asked about my father. The old photo albums that began only after we moved to Albany. The birthdays she celebrated enthusiastically while avoiding every question about the years before I turned 5. At the time, I thought every family had subjects they simply did not discuss. Now those silences felt carefully built, like walls designed to hide an entire life. Adrian reached into the folder one final time and removed a small envelope that looked almost as old as the locket itself. This arrived with the orphanage records, he explained. It was never mailed. He slid it toward me without opening it. Across the front, written in elegant blue ink faded by time, were only 5 words. For Little Sunshine. My breath caught instantly. The nickname echoed through my memory before I could stop it. A warm voice, gentle laughter, strong hands lifting me onto broad shoulders so I could reach apple blossoms hanging above a garden path. Little Sunshine, I whispered. I remember that. My fingers trembled as I carefully unfolded the fragile paper inside. The handwriting was neat, confident, and unmistakably personal. If you are reading this one day, it means someone finally kept the promise they made to me. You are braver than you know, brighter than you believe, and never as alone as you might feel. Keep your smile. The world will try to convince you to lose it. Do not let it. I read the note twice before realizing there was no signature. Only a small drawing in the corner. A tiny sun with smiling eyes. Tears blurred the page. He wrote this, I said quietly. Adrian nodded once. Michael compared the handwriting with several letters Ethan wrote to our grandmother. It matches. I pressed the note gently against my chest. Somehow, reading those words felt less like discovering history and more like hearing a familiar voice finally return after years of silence. He knew me, I whispered. He cared about you. Adrian looked toward the photograph still resting on the table. My brother had a habit of giving everyone a nickname. He believed names should remind people of their best qualities. I smiled through tears without meaning to. Little Sunshine. He said you laughed, even on rainy days. Another memory surfaced, clearer than any before. I was sitting beneath a large oak tree holding crayons, while Ethan carefully folded paper into tiny birds. Every finished bird made me clap with excitement before he pretended they could really fly. I could almost hear the breeze moving through the branches above us. Almost smell freshly cut grass. The memory vanished as quickly as it arrived, leaving my heart aching for someone I barely remembered. Why can I suddenly remember these things? I asked. Adrian answered honestly. Sometimes memories do not disappear. They wait for something familiar to invite them home. We sat together in silence for several moments, neither of us rushing to fill the space. Outside the library windows, children crossed the front steps with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders while tourists paused to photograph the stone lions guarding the entrance. Life continued exactly as it had that morning, yet mine no longer belonged to the person who had walked into this building. Then Michael approached quietly from across the reading room, carrying another archival box. His expression was calm, but there was unmistakable urgency in his eyes. He placed a thin file beside Adrian without speaking. Adrian opened it slowly, scanning the first page before looking directly at me. Emily, he said carefully, We found the adoption authorization connected to your sealed identity. My pulse quickened. Does it say who I was? Adrian swallowed once before answering. No, but it does reveal one thing no one expected. He turned the document toward me. At the bottom of the page, beneath the official court seal, one line remained completely untouched by black ink. Temporary legal guardian during transfer, Ethan Moretti. My eyes remained locked on the final line of the document long after the words stopped making sense. Temporary legal guardian during transfer, Ethan Moretti. I read it again, then again. The letters refused to change. My throat tightened until even breathing felt like work. He was my guardian? I whispered. Adrian nodded slowly, but there was uncertainty behind his eyes. Legally, even if only for a short time, yes. I looked at the faded signature beneath the court seal, imagining Ethan holding a pen instead of my hand, promising strangers that he would protect a little girl who could barely remember her own name. Why would he do that? I asked. Adrian did not answer immediately. He looked toward the tall library windows where afternoon sunlight stretched across the marble floor. Because that is who my brother was, he finally said. He believed protecting one frightened child mattered more than protecting his own comfort. His words settled deep inside me. Another memory drifted forward, clearer than anything before. I was sitting on the hood of an old pickup truck wrapped inside a blue blanket, while Ethan crouched in front of me, adjusting the silver locket around my neck with careful hands. Keep this close, little sunshine, he had said with a smile that somehow made everything feel safe. One day it will help someone find you. The memory disappeared so suddenly that I gasped aloud. Adrian looked at me with concern. You remembered something. I nodded, unable to stop the tears gathering again. He gave me the locket. Saying the words aloud made them feel real. For years I believed my mother had simply handed me an old necklace. Now I understood she had been keeping someone else's promise alive. Michael quietly closed the file. There is another issue. Adrian turned toward him. Go ahead. Michael hesitated. The transfer authorization ends 3 weeks after it was signed. After that, every record connected to Emily disappears. Adrian frowned. Disappears how? Nothing violent. Nothing dramatic. Just gone. Court documents sealed. Medical records removed. School enrollment delayed for years. Whoever handled the paperwork knew exactly how to make a child impossible to trace. I felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sunlight. Someone wanted me forgotten. Michael answered carefully. Someone wanted your identity protected. We still do not know why. Those two possibilities sounded almost identical, yet they carried completely different meanings. Forgotten felt lonely. Protected felt loved. I was no longer sure which one described my childhood. Adrian gathered the papers into a neat stack before looking back at me. Emily, there is one place we have not visited. The orphanage. He nodded. The building has been empty for years, but the grounds are still accessible with permission from the Historical Society. If your memories continue returning, being there may help. I hesitated only briefly before answering. I want to go. The drive north took a little over an hour. Autumn had begun painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson, and fallen leaves danced across quiet country roads as though the wind remembered every season that had passed since I left this place. Neither Adrian nor I spoke much during the trip. Silence no longer felt uncomfortable between us. It felt respectful, giving old memories room to breathe. When we finally reached the abandoned property, my heartbeat quickened before I even stepped out of the car. The brick building stood behind an aging iron fence wrapped in climbing ivy. Time had faded its paint and weathered its windows, yet something about it felt strangely familiar. I walked slowly through the open gate, while dry leaves crunched beneath my shoes. Every few steps another sensation returned. The smell of fresh bread drifting from an old kitchen. Children laughing somewhere nearby. A bell ringing before dinner. I stopped beneath a massive oak tree, standing near the center of the yard. My breath caught instantly. This is it, I whispered. Adrian approached quietly. The tree from your dreams. I reached out and placed my hand against the rough bark. The moment my fingertips touched the trunk, another memory rushed back with astonishing clarity. Ethan was sitting exactly where I stood now, folding tiny paper birds while I counted them out loud. 1, 2, 3. He laughed every time I skipped the number 4, because I insisted it sounded unlucky. I smiled through tears at the absurd little detail. I remember, I whispered. I really remember. Adrian looked toward the branches above us, and for the first time since we met, I saw him smile without sadness. Before either of us could speak again, something bright caught the afternoon sunlight near the base of the tree. Half buried beneath fallen leaves rested a small rusted metal box, as though someone had hidden it there years ago, believing one day the right person would finally come back to find it. For several seconds, none of us moved. The old metal box rested beneath the oak tree as though it had been waiting patiently through every changing season, protected by roots that had grown thicker with every passing year. I knelt slowly, brushing away damp leaves with trembling fingers. Rust covered the lid, but the small brass latch remained intact. "Do you think it is safe to open?" I asked quietly. Adrian crouched beside me, studying the weathered container without touching it. "I think someone wanted it to be found." His words settled over the quiet afternoon. I carefully lifted the latch. It resisted at first, then gave way with a soft metallic click. The lid opened only halfway before stopping against packed soil. Inside rested a bundle wrapped in faded blue cloth, protected surprisingly well from time. I lifted it gently, almost afraid it might disappear if I moved too quickly. As the fabric unfolded, several objects slid into my hands. A tiny paper bird, yellowed with age but still perfectly folded. A pressed daisy sealed inside wax paper. A silver key attached to a leather cord. Beneath them rested a thick envelope with one sentence written across the front in the same familiar handwriting I had already come to recognize. "For little sunshine, when you are finally old enough to understand." My heartbeat echoed inside my ears. Adrian remained completely silent, giving me space to decide. I looked at him only once before carefully opening the envelope. Several handwritten pages rested inside along with one photograph. The picture showed Ethan sitting beneath this very oak tree with a little girl asleep against his shoulder. The girl's face was visible now. Mine. Younger, happier, completely unaware that life could ever become complicated. Tears blurred my vision before I even reached the letter. I unfolded the first page. "Little sunshine, if you are reading this, then life probably became much stranger than either of us wanted. I promised you that one day the truth would find you. I only hope it found you gently." I paused, trying to steady my breathing. Before continuing, "You once asked me why the sun always came back after the rain. I told you that some lights never stop searching for the people they love. I hope you remember that answer because it is true for people too. If I cannot be there when you grow up, I need you to know something important. None of what happened was your fault. You were loved before you could remember it, and you will still be loved after memories return." My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped the pages. Adrian looked away toward the old building, allowing me to read without feeling watched. I continued. "Sarah made an impossible choice because she believed protecting your future mattered more than keeping the past alive. I agreed with her even though it broke my heart. She promised me she would never let you forget kindness, and I promised her I would leave enough pieces behind for you to find your way home one day." Home. The word lingered inside me with unexpected warmth. I no longer pictured an address or an apartment. Home suddenly felt like people who had refused to forget me. I reached the final page. "If my little brother Adrian ever finds you before this letter does, trust his heart before you trust his reputation. The world will know many stories about our family. Some will be true, some will not. But I know him better than anyone. He will keep his promises, especially the ones made to people he loves." I slowly lowered the pages into my lap. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The breeze carried dry leaves across the grass while sunlight filtered through the branches above us exactly as it had in the old photograph. Finally, I looked toward Adrian. His eyes had settled on the letter, but there was no triumph in his expression, only quiet grief mixed with relief. "He believed you would find me," I whispered. Adrian nodded. "He believed hope deserved a plan." I laughed softly through tears. "That sounds like him." Adrian smiled, the expression small but genuine. "It does." I looked back into the box. One item remained beneath the folded cloth. A small leather notebook no larger than my hand. Unlike everything else, it looked almost untouched by time because it had been sealed inside a waterproof pouch. Embossed across the front in faded gold letters were two words: Garden Journal. I carefully opened the cover. The first several pages contained sketches of flowers, birds, and children's drawings. Then the handwriting changed. The entries became dated, personal. Careful observations written over many months. Halfway through the notebook, a pressed maple leaf marked a page that Ethan had folded at the corner. Beneath the date, one sentence stood alone before the rest of the writing began. Today, little Sunshine remembered her real name for the first time. I felt my pulse stop. My eyes rushed to the next line, knowing with absolute certainty that whatever name waited there had been hidden from me for more than 20 years. My hands trembled as I turned the page. The next line was written with remarkable care, almost as though Ethan knew every word would one day matter more than he could ever imagine. Today, little Sunshine remembered her real name for the first time. Amelia. She smiled when Sarah whispered it, then laughed because she said it sounded like the beginning of a song. I stared at the name until the letters blurred together. Amelia. I whispered it softly, testing how it felt against memories that had only just begun returning. Somewhere deep inside me, something answered. Not with certainty, but with recognition. Like hearing an old melody after years of silence. I closed my eyes, and another memory surfaced with astonishing clarity. Ethan was sitting beneath the oak tree while I ran toward him carrying a bouquet of wildflowers much too large for my small hands. Look, Amelia, he laughed, pretending to bow as I crowned him with crooked daisies. The queen has arrived. The memory faded, leaving behind warmth instead of confusion. When I opened my eyes again, tears rolled freely down my face, but for the first time, they did not come from sadness. They came from finally finding a piece of myself that had never truly disappeared. Adrian watched quietly, giving me time before asking the question I knew was coming. Does it feel familiar? I nodded. It does. My voice barely rose above the whispering wind. Emily is the woman I became. Amelia is the little girl someone refused to forget. Adrian smiled gently. Then perhaps you do not have to choose between them. I looked back at the journal and continued reading. The remaining pages described ordinary moments instead of dramatic ones. Ethan wrote about teaching me how to fold paper birds, about Sarah reading bedtime stories until I fell asleep halfway through every chapter, about planting a maple sapling because I insisted every garden needed one tree that turned red in the fall. There were no grand adventures, no impossible mysteries, only kindness recorded with extraordinary attention, as though he believed ordinary love deserved to be remembered just as carefully as history itself. When I reached the final page, the handwriting grew slower. If you are reading this, then life gave us the ending I prayed for even if I was not there to see it. Do not spend your future chasing what was taken from you. Build something beautiful with what remained. Memories are precious, but they are not where life happens. Life happens with the people standing beside you today. I closed the notebook slowly, pressing my palm against the worn leather cover. The afternoon sun had begun sinking behind the old orphanage, covering the yard in warm golden light. It felt impossible that so many years had passed while this little box quietly guarded the pieces of my story beneath the same tree. Adrian stepped closer, stopping beside me beneath the wide branches. There is somewhere I would like to take you, he said softly. A week later, we stood together in a peaceful cemetery overlooking gentle rolling hills outside the city. The autumn air carried the scent of pine and freshly cut grass. Ethan Moretti's headstone rested beneath another oak tree, simple and elegant, surrounded by fresh white roses. I knelt carefully and placed the silver locket against the cool stone for a moment before fastening it around my neck again. Thank you, I whispered, for protecting a little girl who could not protect herself. For believing she would find her way home. The breeze stirred the leaves above us, and for just an instant I could almost hear familiar laughter, carried through the branches. Adrian placed a small bouquet of sunflowers beside the roses. He always said they reminded him of you, he said with a quiet smile. We stood together in comfortable silence. Nothing needed to be explained anymore. The missing chapters had finally found their place beside the ones I had lived myself. As we turned to leave, Adrian stopped beside the cemetery gate. Emily, he began, then paused before correcting himself. Amelia. I looked at him and smiled. Both names belong to me. He nodded thoughtfully. Then I will call you whichever one makes you smile that day. I laughed, the sound light enough to surprise even me. Somewhere along this unexpected journey, the fear that had followed me since the gala had quietly disappeared. It had been replaced by something steadier. Belonging. Not because I had uncovered every answer, but because I finally understood that identity is not built by a single name, a forgotten document, or even a hidden photograph. It is built by every hand that chooses to hold yours when the path grows uncertain. As Adrian opened the gate for me, sunlight broke through the clouds and illuminated the silver locket resting against my heart. I touched it gently before walking forward, carrying both the life I remembered and the life I had rediscovered, grateful that one ordinary evening, a small piece of silver had fallen onto a marble floor and quietly led me all the way back to myself.